Hello everyone, I'm Jamie McLennan, Professor of Sociology at Georgia Southwestern State University, and in this video I'm going to talk about socialization and just how important it is. Socialization is the process by which individuals learn and internalize the norms, values, language, and other cultural features of the society in which they live. You're not born knowing these things, and so they must be learned, largely by interacting with and observing other people. This is an absolutely critical process. And how do I know that this is absolutely critical? Think about it like this. How do you know that water is important for life? We know because something terrible happens to a human when they go too long without it. The same is true of socialization. If it is inadequate or improper, it can have devastating consequences for the individual's development. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Tarzan the Ape Man and Mowgli from the Jungle Book, but they are fictional and pretty far-fetched. I mean, who gets raised not just by wolves, but by a panther, a bear, and a python? Hollywood might have jumped the shark on that one. But have you ever heard of Oxana Malaya, also known as the Ukrainian dog girl? She was born in 1983 and was severely neglected by her alcoholic parents, leaving her to be cared for by dogs. Neighbors reported her when she was 8 years old, but by then, her time with the dogs had had a significant impact on her behaviors, particularly her extremely limited verbal skills. Even over a decade after she had been rescued, she did not ever learn to behave and interact completely normally, though she did learn to speak at a basic level. 60 Minutes did a segment on her about 20 years ago in which they also talked about the well-known case of Genie, a girl found in California in 1970 at the age of 13. She had been kept in isolation by her father, who severely restricted her exposure to language and human interaction. When she was discovered, it was reported that she could not speak, could not stand upright, and did not know how to chew. I find that a little hard to believe, but anyway. Her social skills were severely underdeveloped, and she scored at the level of a 1-year-old on intelligence tests. Despite intense efforts from psychologists to rehabilitate her, Genie remained severely mentally handicapped, was unable to live independently, and unable to form meaningful bonds with others. That is an extreme case of inadequate socialization. There was another case in which a severely isolated child named Isabelle was discovered at the age of 6.5, living in a dark room with her deaf-mute mother. She couldn't talk and scored close to 0 on her first IQ test. According to the sociologist Kingsley Davis, her behavior towards strangers, especially men, was almost that of a wild animal. After 2 years of extensive therapy, though, she was able to become more or less normal. But she was discovered at 6.5 years old, much younger than Genie. So there seems to be a window of time in which proper socialization must occur, or else there will be irreparable damage. The importance of socialization has also been demonstrated by doing studies of children from orphanages to see what effects they might have on their development. In one case, researchers Skeels and Dye took 13 children out of an orphanage in Iowa and placed them in a home for mentally challenged women who would care for them. Back at the orphanage, babies had extremely minimal visual and social stimulation. They were changed efficiently and fed with propped bottles. After 2 years, they compared the two groups of children. Those who were brought to the women's home had gained an average of 28 IQ points, while the babies left behind in the orphanage lost 27, a 55 IQ point shift, which is huge. 20 years later, there turned out to be substantial educational differences, and also the babies cared for in the women's home were much more likely to get married, 85% married versus only 17%. There was a similar study done by researchers in Romania, where there were hundreds of thousands of children living in orphanages during the 1980s and 90s due to national economic and social policies that I won't get into here. For this study, 69 babies were placed in foster families and compared with 67 babies who stayed in the orphanage. And after 6 years, the researchers found that the babies raised by the foster families had bigger brains, higher IQs, were able to focus on a task for a longer period of time, and a greater ability to form bonds with other people. Sophisticated cognitive functioning, forming bonds with others, these are fundamental human abilities, and the consequences associated with institutionalization are still relevant today, as it is estimated that possibly upwards of 9 million children are living in orphanages worldwide. Now, the relative importance of a person's socialization can also be established by twin studies. Specifically, if biological twins who have the same DNA are raised separately, then differences between them later in life can be attributed to differences in their social environment. So that can also establish the importance of socialization in influencing what we think and how we act, thus addressing the age-old question of nature versus nurture. There's a lot more I could go into on that subject, so perhaps we'll save that for another video. I hope you found this useful, and if you did, please like, share, subscribe, and feel free to comment down below. Thank you.